Okay. So this week we're going to start back on the arguments for God. We finished the historicity of Jesus, and then we talked about what we could know about Jesus, and then we talked about the reliability of the New Testament. And that's basically, all that together is basically the argument for Christianity. So we're going to go back to the arguments for God, and we're going to the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Is there any questions about anything that was discussed before or previously or anything like that? We haven't met in like a couple weeks. Did anyone watch that video that I posted?
I started, but then I have to leave, so I'll finish it.
Which one?
I sent out a video, a YouTube video, for basically for people that have been caught up with all the different meetings. There was a video which discussed a lot about the different things we talked about over the last 3 meetings. It had a lot of the scholars that I quoted from on that video. So I sent that out on Facebook and on the email.
Was it a while back?
It was last week-ish. Okay. The cosmological argument originated in the attempts of Christian thinkers to rebuke Aristotle's doctrine of the eternality of the universe, and was developed eternality of the universe, and was developed by medieval Islamic theologians into an argument for the existence of God. So let's look at the formulation of this argument, basically by a guy named Al-Ghazali. He lived 1058 to 1111 AD. He reasoned that every being which begins has a cause for its beginning. Now the world is a being which begins, therefore it possesses a cause for its beginning. Like our last argument, this is a cosmological argument, like the last God argument, so the Leibniz's cosmological argument, which concludes that the universe requires a cause. The difference is the last argument was purely philosophical. It didn't require any kind of scientific evidence to back it up whatsoever. In order for this argument to be a good argument, it needs to be backed up by what we currently know by cosmology. Okay? So I'm going to start with the video, and then we'll go on from there.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, three leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, proved that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
So this is the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Now, this is a deductive argument. You guys have been here since the beginning. Can anyone here, would anyone like to volunteer and put in their own words describing a deductive argument?
I would say it's taking small pieces of information that are related and relate them in a way that comes to some kind of conclusion.
Okay, so a deductive argument is a philosophical way of arguing, which has premises, okay? So we got premise 1, premise 2, and then a conclusion, okay? What we have to do is we have to decide whether the premises are more true than false, okay? So is premise 1 more true than false? Is premise 2 more true than false? If the premises are more true than false, and we conclude that, then you have to accept the conclusion. You don't have a choice. So if you don't accept the conclusion, then you have to show that the premises are more false than true. Okay? That's deductive argument. Okay? Does everyone understand? All right. So First premise is whatever begins to exist has a cause. The second premise is the universe began to exist. And our conclusion is therefore the universe has a cause. So this argument is relatively simple, but there's a lot to unpack with it. So we'll get started with premise number 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Is that more true than false? Why does common sense tell us that premise 1 is more true than false? It is rooted in metaphysical intuition that something cannot come into being from nothing. Okay? Metaphysics. Has anybody heard this term before? Does anyone want to give their own definition of that? Okay. Metaphysics implies to all the knowledge that is beyond the understanding of physics. So it's beyond physics. Physics can't explain metaphysics. So it's rooted in our metaphysical intuition. And when we say nothing, that something cannot come from nothing, we mean nothing. Okay? There's no hidden meaning there. When we say nothing, we mean nothing. No time, no space, no matter, no energy, absolutely nothing. And nothing cannot produce anything. That's just common sense, okay? If things could come into being uncaused, why doesn't anything and everything come into existence uncaused? Once again, it seems like our objectors try to make the universe the exception. Now, does anybody, I'm asking a lot of quiz questions today, does anybody remember what that fallacy is called? If you accept the argument, except for one thing, up until a point. So you accept something, you accept the truth until one point. Well, that's the exception of the rule. I don't accept that. That's called the taxi cab fallacy. That's like you paying for your taxi ride, and then you're getting off before you stop, and not paying for your fee. Okay, so you're along for the ride up until a point, and then you decide to get out. So premise 1 is constantly confirmed by our own experience. And remember, you can't just make an objection. You can't just object to something. The objection also needs to be supported by some sort of evidence, especially when you're objecting against something that just makes common sense. Okay? You just can't make some sort of objection against it. You have to back it up with something. Now, what about the objection that it makes more sense that the universe came into being uncaused than that God caused the universe to come into being? Okay. The response is, and we'll unpack this, and if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand, okay? God exists causally prior to the existence of space and time instead of temporally prior, okay? We'll unpack that. All right, so what this objection is referring to is the idea that God created time before time existed. It is stating that it is impossible for God to create time. They're stating it just doesn't make sense for God to create time, that somehow God existed before time even existed. So if you believe that God existed causally prior to the existence of space and time instead of temporally prior, then it corrects the objection. All right? So, causally prior versus temporally prior. Temporally prior refers to the time before, like my parents temporarily caused me because they existed before me. Okay? They're the cause of me, and they existed before me. Okay? Causally prior refers to a cause that does not, what do I want to say? Causally prior refers to a cause that does require that cause to be before the effect within the time. So it should be does not require. Does not require that cause to be before the effect within that time. Okay? So the best explanation that I can think of is a chandelier. Okay? Think of a chandelier. Now, what is the cause of the chandelier to be suspended? The chain. Now, did the chain come before the chandelier in time?
They're all made of
No, exactly. That the chandelier is not before as far as time, but it is still the cause of why the chandelier is suspended. It's causally prior. Okay? So the chain is causing the chandelier to be suspended. It's causally prior. And that's what that means. Does that make sense? Okay, so what we're saying is, for something to cause something, it doesn't have to be temporarily prior. Okay, it doesn't require for that to exist prior. Now, if you want to, we could discuss what that means as far as God and how God relates to time and eternity. This is a little bit of a rabbit hole. I don't have any slides necessarily prepared for this, but if you have any questions about how God can exist before time and how that makes sense, we can discuss that. Does anybody feel like they want to discuss how that makes sense? Okay. All right. Hold on. Now, all right. So the way there used to be basically two options how God related to time. Before Dr. Craig released a theory. Okay, so it used to be that either God was in time, okay, God was temporal, or God existed outside of time. Okay, so if you choose the option of God existing in time, okay, he relates to us within time, then you would have chosen that God existed within time, an infinite amount of time in the past. Okay? So if you chose that option, then God did not exist before time. Okay? If you chose that option, then time time is just as infinite as God, if that's what you chose. Okay? Or you could have chosen that God exists outside of time. So what that means is that God does not relate to us in time. God's reality is, all right, if you want to imagine what eternity would be like, it's kind of described, if you could imagine all of time forever past, future, present, all of time together into a finite point, always existing. Okay? So, for God, if this is what you chose, for God, there is no beginning and there is no end for anything that we experience. Okay, so there is no ending. Whenever Jesus says it is finished, to God it would not be finished. Okay, because that time, that event would always exist for God. It would never go away for God. Evil will never go away for God, because he experienced every event would just be as real to God as any other event. It doesn't go away. So if you believe that God is outside of time, that's what you would have chosen. Okay? Dr. Craig came up with a theory that before creation, God existed eternally. At the moment of creation, God existed within time. God existed temporally. Okay? So before time existed, there was God, and he existed eternally. And at the moment of creation, simultaneously, God then went from eternal to existing within time. And that was Dr. Craig's theory. Okay? So Dr. Craig theorized that he is causally prior. He is the cause of the universe and existed eternally before the universe. But at the moment of creation, he theorized at that point, God exists within time. So whenever evil is done away with, it is done away with within God's reality. Does that make sense? So that's Dr. Craig's theory. Does anybody have any questions as far as that goes?
I don't have any questions, but I don't agree with it.
Okay. What do you not accept the three options, or?
No, I think God always exists outside of time.
Always exists outside of time. Okay.
He created time, I believe that.
Okay.
But he is outside of time. If he does what this dude says, he would still be within time. Right now, present.
Yes, he would exist within time. Okay.
Well, and I agree with that. I think maybe I'd take it a step further, that God can exist any way he wants. If he wants to travel time, which he created for us to live in, he can do that. Jesus did that while he was on this earth. That neither one is out of God's realm.
Well, God, it doesn't make metaphysical sense for God to both exist within time and outside of time at the
God
same
doesn't
time.
make metaphysical sense either.
God does make metaphysical
Does he?
sense. Yes.
Okay. I don't think God makes sense to humans because he's so different from us.
He is very different from us, but we can know. I don't like the phrase of we don't know we can't know God, or we can't know anything about God, because that would say that the Bible would be useless. So we can know things about God, and we can know about God. Okay. So yes, he is different than us, but that doesn't mean that we can't understand him.
Yeah, I think there are things we can understand because he makes himself available. There are things beyond our understanding.
There are things that God knows that we wouldn't know. But when I say that God makes metaphysical sense, if you say that God doesn't make metaphysical sense, then you are accepting certain paradoxes, like is God so powerful that he can create a rock that he can't lift up,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So if you're saying that God doesn't make metaphysical sense, you're accepting those kind of paradoxes. Okay? So we're not going to debate it. I'm just introducing the concept. Okay? We can debate it another time, but I'm just introducing the concepts. Okay? Any other questions?
I was just wondering, what if he chose not to rock?
What is what?
Pretended not to be.
No, pretend not to be. Well, I believe it's based upon your concept of God. Islam can view God as a deceiver. Christians don't believe God as a deceiver. So, so yeah. All right. Anything else before we move on? Okay. So, what about the objection that premise one is true only for things in the universe, but is not true of the universe itself? Okay? So we briefly talked about this. Well, this is the summary of the last one. Okay, so it's true only for things in the universe, but for the universe itself. It's a metaphysical law that covers all of reality, including the universe. Okay? So the way that I understand this objection is justified is that the universe or the laws of physics prevent things from entering into existence from nothing. Okay? When the universe did not exist, there were no laws of physics, so there was nothing to prevent something from popping into existence from nothing. Okay? So currently, there's physical laws which prevent things from popping into existence. But before the universe, okay, those laws didn't exist. So therefore, something could do that. There's nothing preventing it from doing that. Okay? And that's basically the objection. The causal principle is a metaphysical principle, meaning it exists outside of the physical laws. Being cannot come from non-being. Something cannot come into existence uncaused from nothing, whether there are physical laws or no physical laws. To question this would be the same as questioning our understanding of logic, reason, existence, and so on. So, once again, it's a metaphysical law that covers all of reality, including the universe. The universe is not the exception. Okay? And if like I said, don't be afraid. If you got a question or whatever, you want further explanation, it's fine. Okay? Just raise your hand. Okay, go ahead.
Good question.
No.
So if they say, if someone says, well, God didn't create time, how do they explain time started to exist? It came out of nothing.
Well, we will get into how they try to get past. They try to come up with models that doesn't require a beginning. But if you don't, we'll get into that. But physics can't explain something that's non-physical, okay? So before the universe being everything physical, before the universe, we're saying something caused that, okay? Now they don't like that. Atheists don't like that idea, that something would have to cause that, because that would mean something would exist beyond the physical realm, okay? So they try to come up with different theories to try to explain how something can come from nothing through physical laws. And we'll get into those. But as far as them explaining another metaphysical option, they don't really have another metaphysical option. Does that answer your question? Okay. So, what about the objection that science shows that something can come from nothing? That quantum physics furnishes an exception to the causal principle. Our response would be discussing what they mean by that, which is the quantum vacuum. Okay? All right. So, okay. First of all, a little disclaimer here. Be wary if you are debating with someone who is proficient in the knowledge of quantum physics. Okay, if you are discussing quantum physics with somebody that actually knows what that is they're talking about, there are tactics involved that we will discuss later. Okay, but if you're talking with someone who obviously knows more about the topic than you do, you have to use tactics. You have to move around it. Okay, so it's a possibility. All right. So there are several theories in regard to quantum physics. Not all scientists agree that subatomic events are uncaused, although that is the traditional interpretation. So even on the traditional interpretation of quantum physics, particles do not come into being from nothing. Okay? They arise as a spontaneous fluctuations of the energy contained in the subatomic vacuum. All right? So the vacuum that physicists discuss is not nothing. It is a sea of fluctuating energy endowed with a rich structure and subject to physical laws. The same point can be made toward theories of the universe coming from a primordial vacuum. Okay? So these vacuums exist outside of our observable universe. Okay, so you can't see them. We can't observe them. We can't know empirically that they're there. It's a theory that they could be there. Okay? So, but just because it exists outside of our known existence, that doesn't mean it's nothing. So when a physicist or wannabe physicist tries to argue that physics can't explain how the universe comes from nothing, they do not actually mean nothing. Anything that is subject to the laws of physics is not nothing. Okay? So let me try to these vacuums, okay, that exist outside of our observable universe. You can't see them, but they theorize within these vacuums are these energies. And these energies can move from the vacuum to our observable universe. And that's quantum theory. Okay? So these energies move into our universe, and those energies can actually turn into matter. All right? And that's how they explain that something can come from nothing, because it's outside of our observed universe.
So what they mean is something out of seemingly nothing.
Right, something that we can't observe. So they say, well, that's nothing. That's not nothing. That's something. That's something that we can't observe, but it's still something. Okay?
So it's something we can't measure.
Something we can't measure, something we can't see, something that only exists on paper. Something exists within somebody's mind. Somebody is trying to explain how something can come from nothing. This is what they would say, is theorizing that energies exist in a realm that we don't know of, and they can come into our realm, and that's how something can come from nothing. Well, that's not nothing. Okay, so like I say, when we say nothing, we mean nothing. We don't mean vacuums in an existence in a plane that we don't know of. When we say nothing, we mean nothing. Okay.
So they need to change their lingo, basically.
Yeah.
They need to change it to an unobservable something.
Yeah, yeah. So like there's a famous if you watch the Discovery Channel or the Science Channel or anything like that, there's a guy on there named Lawrence Krauss. He's on there all the time. He debated Dr. Craig, and he goes into that this is nothing. He said he actually says that what we thought was nothing is not actually nothing. Nothing is something. So when somebody says this and says nothing can come. Something can come from nothing. When they say nothing, they don't actually mean nothing. They mean something. Okay. I know it's a little confusing. There's a lot of wordplay there. But when somebody says that science can't explain how something comes from nothing, when they say nothing, they don't really mean nothing. So that's why whenever somebody brings up this objection, you say, well, when you say nothing, you don't really mean nothing. You mean something comes from the quantum vacuum. That's the response. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So that's basically the support for the first premise. I know that's a lot of information. Don't be discouraged. Like I said, if you have questions, we'll take this as slow as we need to. Okay. My wife's waving at me. So before we move on to the second premise, does anybody have any further questions? Did I explain that okay? Does that make sense? All right. So the second premise is the universe began to exist. And we discussed this as the Big Bang. Now, the Big Bang is not your enemy as a Christian. I need to say the Big Bang is not your enemy. For those who believe this, let me convince you that it is a welcomed ally. Okay? Regardless of how old you think the universe is, the Big Bang is your friend. For science is telling us that the universe came from nothing. That's what the Big Bang is. Now we know who banged it. We know who caused the Big Bang. But whenever the Big Bang model is describing as the universe coming from nothing, that's the theory. The Big Bang is not your enemy, okay? Regardless of how old you think the universe is, okay? So, something coming from nothing, the existence of the idea that there's nothing, and all of a sudden the universe exists, that sounds a lot like Genesis to me, okay? regardless of how old you think the universe is, that's the Big Bang model. Okay, that's what we mean by the Big Bang model, is the universe coming from nothing. Okay? Does anybody want to yell at me? Anyone have any objections or any questions just as far as that statement goes? Do you have something? No? Okay. All right. So, and the Big Bang has been ingrained in us for so long. You may wonder why scientists may even try to argue against it, because it seems like scientists try to just constantly remind us about Big Bang over and over again. Well, prior to the events following Einstein's general theory of relativity, scientists believed the universe to be eternal in the past, meaning it's always been there, it's always existed. So, when Alexander Friedman and George Lemaitre worked out the math of Einstein's theory, so Einstein just theorized it. He didn't work out the math. He just said, here it is. So, so these guys worked out the math, and they discovered that either the universe is expanding or it's imploding on itself. So that's the theory. So they worked out the math. They put all the equations, put all the stuff in there according to Einstein's theory, and they came to the conclusion, well, according to you, Einstein, the universe is expanding or it's imploding in on itself. Well, of course, that would have extreme consequences on the current understanding of the universe. It was such a shock to Einstein that he adjusted his equation to allow the universe to remain static. He added what's called the cosmological constant to cause the universe to remain static. So Einstein initially could not believe in his own theory. He could not believe in the possibility that the universe is expanding. This is what led to what is called Einstein's biggest blunder. 14 years later, Edwin Hubble was able to empirically conclude that not only was the universe expanding, but it sprang into existence from a finite past. Hubble used a Hooker telescope and observed a redshift on the distant galaxies. Now, when they say the redshift, whenever something moves away, it moves closer, it gives out a certain kind of color. Okay, so the redshift, it gives out a red color, meaning it's going away from us. Okay, so he measures the color of the redshift, and that's how he was able to tell that the universe is expanding. Okay, so he measured distant galaxies and all that stuff with the current technology that they had at that time, and he was able to conclude empirically that galaxies in the universe is moving away from the Earth. Einstein had no choice but to change his theory back to the original. It has since then been shown time and time again that our universe came into existence from nothing. All right? So insert panic from atheists. All right? Growing up, it's always been presented to me that the Big Bang was an enemy to my Christian beliefs. All right? That's how it was presented to me. They said, don't believe anything that they say. That somehow it was this thing that science was supposed to prove the Christianity to be false. That's not it at all. That's not it at all. Okay? In fact, atheist scientists are desperately trying to figure out how the universe can be eternal because physics cannot explain how something came from nothing, also known in theology as creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing. So let's begin with the support of premise 2. All right, so this is the philosophical support. This is the impossibility of an actually infinite number of things. Okay? So this is a deductive argument. Okay, so what's a deductive argument? Somebody want to tell me what a deductive argument is?
There's premises that you have to agree that are true or false.
Uh-huh.
And they're more true than false.
Right.
Therefore, the conclusion is more true.
The conclusion, no, that's not, the conclusion doesn't have to be more true and false. If it's so powerful that if the premises are more true and false, if the premises are more true and false and they logically, it's a logical argument, the conclusion has to be accepted. Has to be accepted. Okay? So we got our first two premises and then we got a conclusion. So an actual infinite number of things cannot exist. Second premise, a beginningless series of events in time is an actually infinite number of things. Therefore, a beginningless series of events in time cannot exist. Okay? So this is a problem. These philosophical things are going to be a problem for somebody that thinks that God exists within time all the way to an infinite amount of time in the past. Okay? This is going to be an issue for them. So, up there. All right. So, this idea creates too many absurdities. Yes, in mathematics, okay, there are an infinite number of things. There's an infinite sets. Infinities exist in sets. But scientists will admit that just because something works in mathematics does not mean it actually exists in the real world, in the actual world. All right? So this is potential versus actual infinity. So just because we can say something has the potential to be infinite doesn't mean that it's actually infinite. Like somebody could have the potential to run an infinite amount of length. We could say that somebody could have that kind of potential, just theorize it. But would he actually reach infinity? Would he ever get there? No, he would never get there. So there's an example called the Hilbert's Hotel. So imagine a hotel. Hold on, let me. Has anybody heard the Hilbert example before? Yeah. All right. So imagine a real life hotel. Somebody goes there and they only have one room left, and they fill up the room, and at that time there's no vacancy. Okay. So if you want to accept the actuality of infinite, imagine that this hotel has that kind of reality. So imagine that they have all the rooms filled out, okay? But there's an infinite amount of rooms, but all the rooms are infinitely full. Well, what if somebody with all these infinite rooms are infinitely full? What if somebody comes to the hotel and says, I would like a room? No problem. All right, I'll just move the guy from room 1 to room 2, and the guy from room 2 to room 3, so on and so on and so on for infinity. Boom, no problem. All right, well, what if you have an infinite amount of rooms with an infinite amount of people? Okay, so it's full, technically, but then you have an infinite amount of people wanting to get into the hotel. No problem. I'll just take all the people that's in an infinite amount of rooms and move them all into the even numbers, and I move all the new guests into the infinite amount of odd numbers. So that's Hilbert's Hotel. That's the example. So these are the kind of absurdities we're talking about when we're talking about an actual infinite number of things. An actual infinite number of things cannot actually exist. It would create too many absurdities. Does that make sense? All right.
Then we already knew it. It was an absurdity right from the beginning. We didn't need that whole theory, but go ahead.
Right. Well, some people like to say that an actual infinite number of things can exist. Okay. We'll talk about that here a bit. So, the next one is the impossibility of forming an actual infinite collection of things by adding one member after another. So, first premise, the series of events in time is a collection formed by adding one member after another. 2, a collection formed by adding one member after another cannot be actually infinite. Therefore, the series of events in time cannot be actually infinite. All right? So you could potentially count to infinity, but you'll never actually reach to infinity, right? Because it's infinite. You'll never reach that number. So I did this all myself. Imagine a man has the potential to jump infinitely high, okay? He has the potential to jump infinitely high, all right? This is a bottomless pit. It never ends. At what point will a man who can jump an infinite height jump out of the bottomless pit? When would he jump out? Never. Exactly. He will never jump out of that pit. Even though he has the potential to jump an infinite height, he will never jump out of that pit. So this causes a problem for somebody that believes that God exists within time for an infinite amount of past. Okay? At what point would we reach now? If God is, if past is infinitely, if there's an infinite past, what time would we reach now? Never. We would never reach now. Even though God has the potential to exist eternally, if the past is infinite, we would never reach now. All right? Does that make sense? For us to reach now, there has to be a beginning. All right? So this says, mathematics proves an actual infinite. We don't understand infinity. So mathematics does, in mathematics, like I said, there is set theory. There's infinity within mathematics. But like I said, it does not mean it proves an actual infinity. We don't understand infinity. Actually, we kind of do understand infinity. There's a lot of good mathematical work in regards to infinity. We have a good concept of infinity. So that's not true. We should expect absurd situations if an actual infinity exists. Yes, we should. But we don't see them. We don't see these absurdities. Okay? If an actual infinity did exist, yes, we would see these absurdities, but we don't. From every point in the past, there is a finite distance to the present time. That's true. There is a finite distance. There is a finite distance between yesterday and today, right? There is a finite distance. But if you go infinity in the past is infinitely within the past, you would never get to today.
Because we'd have to have an end.
Right. So these are the philosophical arguments saying against the idea that the universe is eternally in the past. Okay, it doesn't make philosophical sense. Okay, we'll get into the science here in a bit, but philosophically, it doesn't make sense. It's illogical, the concept.
Well, in that concept, if I may misunderstand, are they also saying that because of that we can't actually exist in that kind of infinity? We can't experience it. Or am I reading something?
What do you mean? Like, what do you mean we can't experience it? We can't experience infinity because, is that what you're saying? When you say you can't experience it?
Can't experience life if, I've twisted my brain around, but something you said made me wonder if they also believed, if that was true, we could not experience life in an infinity.
If the past never ended, we would never begin, is that what you're saying?
I don't quite understand what it is you're saying. Like, are you saying that because, are you saying if the past is infinite, we wouldn't be able to experience our current reality? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, if the past is infinitely in the past, at no point would you be able to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many years. You would never reach till now because it's infinite in the past. Okay, there's no beginning point. And if there's no beginning point, how would you ever get to now?
So in reality, we really couldn't exist or couldn't experience existence.
Right, yeah. But we do exist, so it doesn't make sense that the past is eternal. Is that okay? So that covers the philosophical support for premise 2. We'll start the science stuff. All right. So this is the standard model of our universe. Okay. So everything comes down to a tipping point, and as time goes on, it expands. Space expands. That makes sense? So you go all the way back through time, through the universe. At some point, you'll reach a finite beginning, a tipping point. And that's the beginning. And as time goes on, the universe expands. That's what Edwin Hubble discovered, is that the universe is expanding. This is the standard Big Bang model. Does anyone have any questions about that?
That's smart to ask questions about that.
I kind of remember that. And then the stars that are closer, the redshift is less.
Yeah.
Say that again?
The stars that are closer to us, the redshift is less.
Yeah. Yeah. As it moves further away, the bigger the redshift.
Kind of like, well, it was described to me in class, because you hear like a car coming by
Mm-hmm.
with the horn going in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was the red shift?
Light frequency.
Okay, got it.
So this is the standard Big Bang model. So if you go back in the past, there's a finite point where the universe began, and as time goes on, the universe expands. This is the standard Big Bang model. So what exactly does the Big Bang imply in regarding to the beginning of the universe? All right. So the Big Bang model shows that the universe is expanding. It originated from an initial cosmological singularity. This singularity represents everything, including space, time, matter, everything. The physical laws, all that. So it suggests that the singularity came into existence out of nothing. Okay, that is the Big Bang model, which represents an absolute beginning. Okay? So, what if someone were to say that maybe there was some physical reality prior to the Big Bang? Okay, what if somebody were to come up with that suggestion? Well, if they were to come up with that suggestion, then they are suggesting another model than the Big Bang model. Okay? If somebody tries to say that, maybe there was something before the Big Bang, they're not talking about the Big Bang. They're not talking about the Big Bang model.
So it sort of cancels out the Big Bang model. If that is true, then the Big Bang model doesn't.
Yeah, if there was something before the Big Bang, then the Big Bang isn't true. Yeah. So it has been emphasized by physicists at this singularity, space and time came to existence. Literally nothing existed before the singularity. So if the universe originated at such a singularity, we would truly have a creation ex nihilo. From nothing. Creation from nothing. So, like I said before, ever since it has been discovered that our universe is not eternal in the past, scientists have been trying to come up with models to once again bring the universe back into a state of eternality. So why would they be doing this? One reason would be the excuse of having an infinite amount of time to allow things to occur naturally. One example is the concept of organic coming from inorganic, life from non-life. If the universe was eternal, you could say that anything is possible given enough time. However, we currently have a time limit, which does not give us enough time for that to logically occur on its own. So that presents additional issues. Okay, if you want to get into cosmology, and you want to apply Darwin's theory to cosmology, okay, there isn't nearly enough time for everything that we now know exists for that to happen. Even if you use their almost 14 billion years ago, even if you were to use that number, there's still not enough time for all this stuff to happen on its own by itself with no additional support. Okay, so it causes issues. The idea that there is a beginning and there's only a certain amount of time from the beginning till now. Okay.
And they're taking that time frame issue from what the history of man has been able to observe.
Right.
So they're assuming that it would take the same amount of time no matter when it occurred.
I'm talking about like if someone were to theorize that, like I said, like life coming from non-life, they could say, well, it's possible because we have an infinite amount of time to work with. So like the odds of that actually happening are just astronomically low, okay? But if you have an infinite amount of time to work with, then you could say, well, although the odds of that happening is so low, we've had an infinite amount of time. So yeah, it's possible that it could eventually happen, but we don't have an infinite amount of time. Even if you use the almost 14 billion years that people believe that the universe has been around, there's still not enough time for life to come from non-life. So they're trying to discover a way to explain how the universe is eternal. So they come up with these models. So they come up with these models. All of them thus far has failed in one way or another to try to bring back the eternality of the universe. Now, I'm not expecting you to learn these models and understand the physics behind these models. This is merely to show you how desperate some are trying to find another option other than the Big Bang model, other than creation coming from nothing. Okay? Now, we'll finish there. We'll finish there. Next time, we'll start on at the steady state model, and we'll talk about different models that they've tried to come up with other than the Big Bang. But this is where we'll end right now. Okay?
So those are alternatives.
Yeah, but we're going to start introducing alternatives to the Big Bang model.
I did take math classes that covered infinity,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the rate of expansion of infinity, and you could actually divide two infinity numbers,
Yes.
and depending on how quick one expanded together, you
Yeah.
could come up with something.
Yeah. Infinite sets is a very well-developed mathematical theory. Yeah, but like I said, just because it can't exist on paper within mathematics doesn't mean it can actually exist in the actual world.
Yeah, I have a beautiful house.
That's why it's a theory.
Yeah. Any questions before we
So
close?
is the universe really expanding, or are we just able to see more into the universe than we used to? I mean, are things really moving away from Earth?
Yes. Yeah. With the universe is moving away from each other, and at a rapid pace. They used to theorize, and we'll talk about this next time, but they used to believe that the universe would eventually, once it reaches a certain point in its expansion, it would slow down and stop, and it would collapse back on itself. They used to believe that the expansion was slowing down, but they now have come to the conclusion that it's actually speeding up. The rate of expansions going faster.
So sounds like there's more energy.
Well, the expansion, you're right. That's how they used to believe why it was slowing down, because they used to believe there was only so much energy based upon their calculations of like gravity, and they were basically using gravity. But they realized that space, like this was actually Lawrence Krauss's work. Space, the vacuum of space, is actually not nothing, and there's something out there called dark energy, and dark energy is what's providing the energy of the expansion of the universe. universe and why it's expanding at the rate it is. And that's why they use Einstein, they currently add Einstein's cosmological constant that he took away, but they think maybe he was right after all with the cosmological constant, and that has the explanation of dark energy within it.